All right, so we have a lot of work to do. We have exactly 390 slides, so let's do it. Yes, so first of all, I have a very important question to ask, and a very important statement, which is kind of like disclaimer, just worse. The things you're going to see today, you will never be able to unsee. And I remember I was saying it like 1.5 years ago, and I think I kept my promise, didn't I? Yes, so some things will stuck with you, but this is on you now. Now, I have to do one thing. In this presentation, you're going to see approximately 42 cats. So I need to ask you first, because I know, Tel Aviv is a city of cats. Who is a cat person? Oh, cat people, okay, good number. What about dog people? Have dog people? Well, according to my scientific survey, which I've been running over the last 2 months, there are approximately 30% cat people, 40% dog people, and everybody else just doesn't care. Which is okay, but it's too late for us. Bear with me, this is going to be a cat journey. This is me, this is how I used to look like back in the day. Things change. I co-founded this little website a while back, and basically every day I'm still spending on it, but it's kind of going to change very, very soon, becoming this. Oh, wait a second, come on. The magic, yes. Becoming this, but don't worry, that's okay. If you hate red or don't like red, this can be your option as well, so that's fine. Now, today I want to kind of tell you, to bring you with me together on a journey, kind of exploring all the things that were discovered during this journey of building this thing. It was a nightmare, to be honest. It took us altogether approximately 18 months. It took everything, rewriting front code, like rethinking UX, CSS, JavaScript, everything. The stack, we used to run WordPress, no longer. That's been like a long, long journey. So over the next 40 minutes or so, I want to kind of look into what we have done and why we have done it, and also kind of explain the motivation behind it. But don't worry, it's not like a sponsored thing or whatever. I really just want to share what we have learned. And I want to look into kind of 4 different dimensions of it. On the design side, the front-end side, back-end, and also the things that's still to do, or things that are left to do. Now, how many of you are designers? Who is a developer? Who is a developer? Who is the diviner? Maybe like with a tendency here and there. So we all kind of tend to work on different worlds, so which is why I think it's really important to kind of bring all of these worlds together. And before I dive in deeply, I want to kind of go into a little journey back in time, exploring the main motivation behind the entire thing. And what specifically, when I talk about design, I want to specifically talk about visual design. Because today, if I look into the state of things, and I think that we all had this conversation, even at this conference, everything is so generic, right? Everything looks very similar. It doesn't matter what we're doing, it's more or less looks very, very same. Right? So maybe it's time to kind of rethink how we approach web design today, and think about how we can embed some sort of personality in it again, like in good old Flash times. Right? Now, there is a good reason for it. It's not because we're stupid or we're not creative enough or anything of that kind. Well, the design process is weird and complicated because it involves people and systems and organizations which often are weird and complicated. Right? I don't know what it's like here in Israel. It's totally true in Germany, where most of my projects are. And the reason for it is because we tend to see the creative process being a very linear and a predictable, more or less predictable process, where you have a starting point somewhere, right here, and go, and you iterate and iterate and iterate and explore to find out the finish line, right? But this is not what the reality looks like. To many managers, this is what the creative process looks like. And don't get me wrong, when I talk about creative process, for me it's both design and development. Developers are as creative as designers. But I feel that in many ways, my creative process looks much more like this, right? Where you start somewhere and you go and you explore all kinds of different options and diverge and try to figure out and explore, and be it frameworks, or be it techniques, or be it drafts and design mockups and all of this stuff. So we keep exploring, and at some point we hit this dead end right here, where we just don't know what to do. Right? And recovering from this dead end actually takes a lot of time, because you have to find another way of progressing, because you have to make progress. And if I look at you now, you are smart cookies. You don't have time to figure out stuff, like you have to deliver, right? Which actually forces us to rely on things that used to work in the past. So this is why we end up with this. Which one of these 2 possible websites are you currently designing today, right? The one on the left or the one on the right? Because there is nothing else on the web. That's it. The only difference sometimes that you have a carousel on the top or the bottom, but that's it. So maybe we've kind of, we got into this pixel pushing, and if we look around ourselves, and then the way we work, and the way our colleagues work, how many of you had this conversation in the past? Let's move away from 12 pixels border radius to 10 pixels. It's better this way. And then 2 months later, let's go to 13, right? Did anybody had this conversation before? Right? Does it matter? To designers, it does matter. I know, right? But does it really matter? How are we becoming these pixel pushers? Should we look at the big picture of things? Because, if you look into this process, the creative process that we all admire and respect, we kind of tend to stick to good practices and best practices. Now, you should not define the line height in pixels. That's not cool. You're not supposed to do that, right? Or God forbid, you should not base the breakpoints on device sizes. That's not cool. That's not a good practice, right? And you should not take the name of the Lord, performance, in vain, right? So we care about performance. It's really important, so you better not, right? So where does it leave us? Well, you have a new project. Somebody comes to you. You have some content. You have some navigation. You put it on the desktop, and you say, well, this is my first mockup. And then somebody tells, no. This is not how things work these days. It's 2017, so you should start mobile first. I would like to add some music to make it a bit more dramatic. That's way better, right? No. You don't start desktop first, you go mobile first. So you go mobile first, and you know a magical symbol, a magical icon that's universal. It's universally understood. It should be in the right, it belongs to be in the right upper corner, right? Or left upper corner, depending on right to left or left to right interface. But then somebody comes to you and tells you, no. You should not use the menu icon, the hamburger icon, because if you have something important to show, like an add to cart button or a kind of call to action button, you just display it. It's going to be better for traffic, and that's true. So you say, okay, but I still have to organize this content somehow. So, it goes under the menu, and so somebody comes in and tells you, no. You should not put important stuff below the fold, and you know how to keep the stuff above the fold. You've learned it in the past. There is a fantastic user interface pattern, also called as a carousel. No. So where does it leave us? This is Creative Process 2017, right? And that's actually very, very sad, because we can actually do better. We can create layouts like this on the web today, like with CSS Grid layout, like Hu Jing told us in the first day, right? We can create layouts like this, but in the end, something that is supposed to look that beautiful tends to be templated down into a template like this, right? So a while back, I attended a conference, and this guy, Danish designer, Morgan Smuller, like 19 years old, he said, well, if we want to stand out today, we need to convince and delight customers with a remarkable design and a unique, charming personality. And having an unprecedented attention to detail. And I think we can't afford it. How many of you have an unprecedented attention to detail that you can spend on a given project? We don't have time for it. So I was desperately, for our redesign, kind of desperately trying to find that framework that would make it possible to embed some sort of personality into our design without having a huge budget, without having a huge amount of time to make it work. So this I disagree with, but he continued, we should underpromise and overdeliver. Capture attention and guide it skillfully. On the web today, it all boils down to one single thing: outstanding storytelling through great art direction. And that was interesting, but when I think about art direction, I think about websites like this. Some of you might have seen it before. Can you imagine how much effort and time and discussions and budget and resources went into creating this? Can you afford spending a weekend or a week building this? Now, that's a remarkable piece of design, I would say, right? But this is not it's probably one-off. It's not something everybody can afford. If you look into it, every single page is like it should be in an exhibition somewhere, right? It's really, really hard to find any examples of this on the web today, right? Yes, it's kind of like back good in good old Flash times, but I really kind of miss it in a way, right? And again, when I think about storytelling, yes, this is storytelling at its best, but we cannot afford it. And when I think about storytelling, think about this, or maybe this, maybe this, but not this. All our interfaces can you think about a story being told in your interface today? I asked myself, how come it that I have no loyalty to Uber at all? If there was a service in a city that was, like 5 cents cheaper on average, I would jump from Uber to somewhere else in a second. But somebody has to actively give me money, so I move away from MailChimp, because I have such a strong connection to them. And it's understandable why. And don't get me wrong, I'm not stupid. Of course, it's all marketing, and they would create this chimp, and it's a character, it's cute, yeah, whatever. It doesn't matter that much. What matters is it's humane. It gives there is a sense of humanity in the brand. They create these books, like color books, that they give to just distribute all the way in the streets to everybody for free. There is no button anywhere saying, hey, we're MailChimp, we're the best email company in the world. Email is boring. Who cares about email? They invest more into branding, I think, at this point, and UX than anything else. And it's really easy to connect with it. It's very difficult to connect with Uber. It's very difficult to connect with MailChimp. Like, I love eating bananas for breakfast, right? Well, so do I. So here's our connection, right? And it keeps going, it goes, and keeps going, and keeps going. And even things like, I love being me. Do you love being you? How can you answer this question in a negative way? Like, I hate myself. I hate myself. I can't stand myself. This is horrible, right? So this thing kind of stuck with me for quite some time. And before diving in, I want to share just a few stories to kind of indicate what I mean here. I'm totally overrunning this. Just saying. One of them, it's really, really important, I think, is the Tijuana Flats redesign. So Tijuana Flats is a chain of Mexican restaurants in the US. And this is what it looks like. It's pretty huge. I mean, you might hate the design, you might like the design, it doesn't matter. But it has a unique style and voice. I think we all agree on that. And of course, that's kind of a presence that they have, right? And the ceilings that they have are really, really tall, and the walls are huge. And look at the people sitting there, right? And these are the walls, so they're really, really huge. So every 3 or 4 months, they would hire new graffiti artists to come and repaint and kind of continue telling that story, right? And of course, I mean, this story has to be reflected somehow in the menu, which it is, right? And of course, it should be reflected in their website as well. So welcome to the website. You might like it, you might hate it, but I would say that it actually fits well with the story that they were telling. Now, in the spirit of performance, of killing parallax, of killing web fonts, of killing all the too heavy imagery, keeping everything flat, keeping everything simple, keeping everything just fast on the web, they moved away from this to this. And I think there is a lot of stuff left and lost in this transition. So maybe we should be breaking things more often than we actually repair them. And Bloomberg, of all companies, knows it very well. Bloomberg, you know Bloomberg. Now, they had a problem because they were not connected to anything particular. They didn't have a loyal readership, right? They were like MSNBC, Financial Times, who cares? So they hired a bunch of designers who were given the freedom to do whatever they wanted. And oh yes, they did whatever they wanted. So here's the website for the Bloomberg Design Conference. You might hate the design, you might find it horrible. It works really well because they sold out within 2 weeks. Way better than any other website that they created years before, right? So it might be a horrible design, but it's a beautiful design because it works and it does its job. And so they create these crazy things, crazy features, which are just out of space. This is 2016, 50 companies to watch in 2017, right? And it's all weird and has this kind of strange feeling all around it. Well, they risk it for the sake of having a personality. Not everybody has to do it, but you can. Now, the next thing is just wow. Are you ready? Okay, this is something. I'm just going to leave it going for a second. So, this is a feature that they created on Tesla, and that's what it looks like. Okay, now this is one of the traffic's heaviest they got this year. It was released in September 1st, I believe, 1 month ago, 2 months ago, right? And it's pretty much going against everything we are supposed to do, right? Which, of course, is by design. Now, the visualization is fantastic, right? You can explore and do whatever you like with it. That's kind of a special thing on its own. There are many gems that you will find all over the place, which is just a bit weird, I would say. But we've seen it before, haven't we? If you look into like the Dropbox rebranding, Like, okay, this is a bit too much, right? But if you go into like, Dropbox rebranding and things that Spotify used to do, like the brutalism thing, it's a desperate attempt to be a little bit different, right? And again, you might hate it, but it's consistent in a way. But this is too much. Not everybody can afford it. So if you don't have resources to make it work, I always take inspiration from a Hans Brinker hotel. Now, this is a great story as well. Now, here's a problem. Hans Brinker is a hotel in Amsterdam. I mean, I'm getting to my point. Promise me. Hans Brinker is a hotel in Amsterdam. The problem is, it's not a good hotel. Okay? So what do you do if you're not a good hotel? They had problems, literally struggling to find sellers for tickets in the hotel. So two options. You either close down, because you are horrible, or you invest into making it at least look better. Right? So both options were not really options because they didn't have any resources. So they hired a professional, well, semi-professional designer who was paid one burrito for the job. And he said, well, we can't make it the best experience in the world. So let's be honest about who we are. What if we try to sell the most horrible hotel experience in the world? Let's remove everything good we have to make it a bit more interesting, and let's try to sell the most horrible hotel experience in the world. Now, guess what? They're expanding to Lisbon now because they're sold out 2 months in advance, right? And of course, the design actually has to reflect this identity as well, or this branding too, right? And it goes all the way. Like, one of the things is, we talk about social media buttons being horrible. Well, social media buttons can be, big problem, third-party scripts and stuff like this. But, you go all the way. You don't need one. You can use 20, right? Because why not? It fits in nicely with the design. Sometimes it's enough to, you can actually break the rules like in a crazy way. I hope you appreciate the cursor hover effect here, which is a bit surprising. So, and we don't have to go this way. This is a bit too much. But if you just apply the same idea to a slightly more subtle setting, that can work really well. It's kind of the same idea like in the previous website, just, much more subtle. And so think about the most annoying thing that you can have and try to make it a bit more delightful. Now, we talk about pop-ups being horrible. This is the best pop-up I've seen in years. I would love it to be everywhere, on every single page. It's so delightfully annoying, I can't get rid of it. I keep coming back to the site because it's so remarkable, right? And it just fits within the story, right? And even those things, like this is annoying, and so sometimes they don't even care. You can type in the 32nd or 43rd month, 1547, and it still passes the gates. So try to make it a bit more playful. Like here in Austin Beer Works. Are you 21? No. Are you at least 18? No. Are you 17? You're not making this easy. Please tell us you're 16. Jesus Christ. Really? No way you're going to click yes at this point, right? Now, once somebody discovers this, there is no way to say yes here, by the way. Right? So they turned think about picking one annoying thing, the most boring thing you can think of, and try to turn it into a nice and pleasant experience. And what is more boring than a title attribute? We know why people ask for it, because they want to spam us. That's the only real reason for it, right? They want to send us campaigns and promotions when we don't want them because they need to know the gender. So go overboard. Don't just ask Mr. Mrs. Go all the way. Because why not? Right? Maybe you feel like being a princess today, or maybe like a lieutenant commander. That's even better. Or maybe the baroness. That would be pretty cool. Right? So you can actually go with it. And sometimes even those little things, and I'm totally overrunning, but I think it's really cool. Let's just play music here as well. So you have to sign up here in order to use the interface. For Bandcamp, they can pull it off. So when you start typing, the music starts playing. You can like elevator music, right? And then once you're finished with the password, oh, drinks, excellent. That's timing, good timing, right? And then once the music's once you're finished with the input, all right, that's it, that's done. Why not? It's like elevator music on a website. The problem is, what if you're playing music already? Okay, that's a bit too much, right? Yeah, I'm just going to leave it here. But you don't have to go overboard. And this is kind of the lesson I want you to take from it, right? It's very nice and cute, and it actually really works. But sometimes you can't pull it off. So what if you need to do something quick? You need some ideas. Well, of course, it can be a visual treatment. We just have a unique style repeated everywhere. You can have an idea, that's enough. This guy has a portfolio, and the only thing that's different about this portfolio, he splits himself into 3 parts, colored differently, and that's his style, his signature. So every time you refresh or resize, it looks a bit different. That's his thing. Okay, that's cool, that sounds great. Here's another one. If you remove all the animations and all the still key transitions here, it looks like exactly like every other portfolio website on the web. Right? So this animation, which is just it's incredible, it's the only thing that makes it really, really different. And sometimes even the lack of animation can work the same way as well. The difference here is that they introduce a transition delay between images and illustrations to show up. So the moment you start interacting with it, it just all appears in, slowly after each other. That's the signature as well. Which brings us to the exercise we do all the time. If you actually think about designing something today, think about what would you create. This is what we asked ourselves. What would you create if you couldn't use any rectangles or circles? What would it be? Is there anything on the web that's not a rectangle, not a circle? I hope so, right? Think about typography and video and audio and, and VR, like Martin tells us, and so many other things, and all kinds of shapes and SVG, everything. So we thought, okay, let's think about what it would mean for us. And when it comes to our redesign, it all started with a big problem. And the problem is, of course, ad blockers. And don't get me wrong, I'm using an ad blocker as well, and I know that most of you are using ad blockers too. But we had to find a way to kind of solve this problem, well, with missing advertising as a result, by embedding some sort of personality and also making it more interesting and creating products that we care about, right? So ad blockers are a problem for us. 50% revenue declined yearly over the last 6 years, which means that right now we're at 1/18th of what we used to earn 5 years ago. That's a big deal. At this point, 66% of our users, because it's people like you, are blocking ads, which is totally fine because I'm using ad blocker as well. There are reasons, right? But it meant that we had to rethink. We had to think about what would we do in order to make it work better. Because advertising obviously is crushing down and it's not going to work anymore, at least not for us. So we had this idea, and it actually is coming, which is the membership, and it's one of the products that we're introducing, and it had to be the central thing. So if you're signed in and you want to buy a conference, you're getting a discount. You want to buy books, you're getting a discount. But this kind of stuff would be wonderful and great to have as a platform, but we didn't have it because historically, we had complicated system. We started in 2006 with a WordPress setup. We also used a Ruby-based system for jobs. We used Shopify, well, before that Magento for the shop. We also had a lot of customized plugins and all this stuff. So connecting everything together was really, really hard. So it was kind of an opportunity for us to rethink what we were doing over the last 11 years because we never actually had an opportunity to really create a smashing experience. And we had to ask ourselves what it means. So we had to create all of this, right? A tool for the magazine, CMS, 2,500 articles, comments engine, e-commerce platform, subscription service, a job board, and membership from scratch, which took us a lot of time and took us a lot of people who were involved. We had Daniel and Sarah being involved quite from the start. Andrew Clark helped us in the beginning as well. We had Ilya working in the front end, and Mark, and show all of these names because they are important. I mean, I'm here presenting on stage, but they are the people who are doing all the hard work behind the scenes. So they have to be here as well, right? And so we ended up kind of coming together to create this. And we started with something very simple. And this is where I was kind of involved, looking into text-based design first. So one of the very first mock-ups, which is very generic and doesn't say much, looked like this. So instead of going into Photoshop or I just took paper and started writing down the component that we will need, like the navigation and the microcopy that we were going to use. And it looked quite generic, but even things like micro-interactions, like a pop-up or light box, if you want, in here, right? It can be prototyped with text alone. And one specific thing that I looked into from the very start was designing error messages. Yes, error messages. So we had to find our story, right? We had to embed somehow our personality. So our messages, error messages, can help you a lot because they feel like a gateway to me. If you can pick up a customer who is annoyed at a given time and delight them somehow, although I hate the word delight, but make them smile, right? You can actually create an emotional connection that you can use later. So many of the things, and they're now out of context, so they don't make sense, but once you're on the site, you feel like, yes, this is a part of a story, right? So things like, if you have a city as an input field and you have to, it's wrong or it's missing, normally it would just say, hey, you have forgotten to type in a city, but probably the best place in the world if you live there. That's a nice error message, because it obviously is connected to the input, which will also be highlighted. Right? And once we actually started thinking about error messages and text, we started looking into typefaces. Right? And we looked into many different options. In the end, we picked Elena for body copy, and we went for media for headings. And I hate it. I hate it so much. Look at the A. Just look at the A. I hate it so. Just look at the A. This is just unbelievable. Oh, I can't. I'm okay, but I really don't like it. But the reason why we went for it, because it was consistent with our brand. When we started looking to it, asking people like you, so how do you feel? What does Smashing brand stand for you? Right? People would say things like friendly and open-minded and things like that. And most importantly, people would say things like cats. I never wanted my legacy to be cats. Right? But people were actually connecting Smashing as a brand with cats. And there is a reason for it. But it's our major product, so to say. We have like 5 conferences every year. Right? And so obviously we also have these cats. We have to promote this conference. Every conference has a cat. And so they're all over the place. Every single photo people take always have cats. Right? And so it kind of makes sense that it's actually connected somehow. And it was a question that I had to ask myself and my colleagues. Should we embrace how people see us? Or should we just become, this rigid, professional, sturdy foundation of the web development community? And I thought, okay, personally, I hope it's not recorded, I don't like cats at all. I'm not a cat person at all, but I don't mind having a few cats. And in fact, we said, let's go with cats. So we have many, 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 many cats, really many cats. But in the end, it was not only about this, having this kind of character or so. It was also about finding the right angle. And it was actually literally meaning finding the right angle. Because we played with different layouts, and we wanted to find what would be that unique perspective that would make our personality, right? And so we looked into layouts like this with vertical headings and all kind of interesting magazine-like layouts. And then we looked into the logo, and we realized quite quickly that this tilting of the logo could become our signature, right? And so we ended up creating layouts that were actually rounded and made off, so to say, with this kind of tilting in mind, right? So many of the first prototype actually included some sort of elements which contained this tilting, right? And so if you look in here, the style guide that we created as well, the living style guide, it also contains all of those tilted elements. Then things kind of evolved over time. So this has become our signature. Again, what I'm saying here, you don't need to go like big time and find something crazy. Just find one little thing that kind of defines who you are and use it consistently. And sometimes even just find the most boring element and just use it all the way, right? And so as a result, we ended up with a layout like this, right? But everything else, well, pretty much everything is tilted. By the way, I know that many of you will hate this part over here. It's like, why do you dedicate so much space to authors? It's just wasted space. It makes reading difficult. Well, I think that most of the time, authors just don't get credit at all. If at all, they just get a little bit of credit, like a byline somewhere. So I'd rather give authors too much space than too little space. So sorry, it's not going to change. Now, but also many other things are just tilted, because why not? The forms, of course, tilted. That's no problem, right? Once you tap on it or hover, it's going to be untilted, obviously. Oh, this is just a testing thing, right? Many things are kind of happening in this direction. This is where it was really important to kind of keep this construct that we created, this tilting, right? It had to be kind of somehow involved pretty much everywhere. And I think it actually is. And one thing that really, really helped there was to use this slow motion technique, if you like, where I would sit in front of a laptop doing this and recording it and just going then step by step, just trying to play it in slow, slow, slow motion to find all the weird things happening in the interface. So I have tons of videos like this. Like if you look into it, like going all the way, trying to find out if everything is really right. And not because I'm a perfectionist, but just to make sure that we don't have any visual noise and stuff happening. Which of course also requires some focus, right? And so imagine you wake up and you have a problem that looks like this. All of a sudden, your prices look slightly weird. That's not what you want, I guess. So you think, I have to fix it, right? Okay, so my illustrator just sent me new pictures of cats. Okay, that's nice. So you start up. Sorry, I have to jump a little bit. You start up, you sit down, and you start creating like something like this, maybe conference page adjustments, minor type adjustments for speakers and talks, and then you go more cat illustrations, cat with dog outfit adjustments, and horizontal lines for meow content. And oh yes, we actually wanted to go all the way. We thought because there are actually 8 emoji you can use in CSS, you can actually use in HTML and CSS. So it kind of makes sense. The problem is they actually look different on different platforms. So no, but this definitely works. So I highly encourage you to introduce this in your CSS and HTML if you can, right? Now, we also obviously had to do a lot of work when it comes to front end. Now, this was kind of the signature that we defined and found quite quickly, but we actually had to find a way of what we're going to deal with, how we're going to deal with front end and back end, right? Now, front end, okay, so let's look at the browser support. Now, when we looked at it in 2015, it looked pretty nice. Now, we have nice, friendly browsers. So you can imagine, of course, what the browser statistics would look like. So actually, right now, Chrome is even more. So that's interesting. And Firefox is like at 9%. But of course, we need to talk about the other ones. Oh, now I can almost see pressure raising, right? And it was actually very comfortable. It wasn't really a big deal. So it felt like, OK, we can pull off whatever we want. Although that's not quite true, because we have one person coming to smashmagazine.com once a year just to get on my nerves, with the user agent being Internet Explorer 666. That is not a joke, right? That really is reality. But it really makes my stats in the end of the year totally weird and crazy. But that's OK. I respect that, right? Now, when we started writing code, we thought, OK, we need to find some sort of framework of writing. How do we write CSS and JavaScript? And so Patty Taunt spoke at the Smashing Conf once, and she mentioned this pyramid for writing your CSS components. When they build at Filament Group, when they start building components, they always think about speed first, then access, then scale, then style. Basically meaning you keep it fast, you keep it accessible, then you start thinking about responsive design and breakpoints and grid and stuff like this. And eventually, you think about all those whistles and bells, the personality, the custom font, the brand colors, and things like that. So pretty much every single component that we built was built in this sequence, when you will find even properties actually written down in this order. Speed, then access, then scale, then style. That was really helpful. However, we also had to make a decision. Are we going to use any frameworks or not? We used to use jQuery like a long time ago, and of course we didn't want to use it. We didn't want to use anything huge. We didn't want to use Angular or React or anything of that kind. We actually wanted to keep it simple. However, the infrastructure and the architecture that we built required us to have some sort of framework. So we actually, that kind of makes sense. We actually wanted to keep something quite predictable and simple. I actually asked about jQuery a while back, and it looks like it's really, really fading away. So instead of using React, we actually went with Preact, which made perfect sense at the time. We probably will move to React at some point, because we had to customize everything. So in the end, it's like, so we'll see how it goes. At this point, it all runs on Preact, and it's all built on top of it. Also, it was really important not to use media queries. Now, you might be asking, what the hell? Now, what did media queries do now? Well, it's not like I hate media queries. I just don't particularly like them. That's a different kind of way of seeing them, looking at them. And the reason for it is because the more the more perfectionist you are, the more work you have to invest into keeping it maintainable long term. So because whenever you're working with designers, you always have this kind of graph, right? Or this kind of chart. You have maybe like a beautiful mobile view, and then you have a beautiful desktop view, and as developers, we have to interpolate in between, right, when building layouts. And in this interpolation space is where things start breaking. And then you add a breakpoint, and then you add a breakpoint, and then you add a breakpoint, like in here, right? When the navigation is a bit off, right? Or maybe like the navigation here is a bit off, so you do a breakpoint, and then a breakpoint, and then a breakpoint, and that's an issue. So that we try to kind of create Well, the idea behind the design was to create something that would actually scale, literally scaling. Now, looking into the layout, this is what we ended up with, right? And when we started building it, one idea that we had, and I think I showed it last time, was to actually use mathematical equations in order to make it work. And the idea is coming from Mike Friedman, who invented fluid sizing. But the idea is very simple. We want kind of this behavior. Imagine, for any component, whatever component you're building today, being able to define a function that defines its behavior, right? You put it anywhere on the page, and because it knows its local scope, it can change depending on the context in which it's in. Like container queries, all of this stuff. But actually think about it on a more global scale. You define the behavior of a component, and then because it knows where it is, it can be adjusted, styled accordingly, right? Now, normally, if we put a map right here and we create, like I say, font sizes on the y-axis and the viewport on the x-axis, we'll find out that most of the time, whatever we're designing, it's not linear. It's more like this, in a way, right? So we're kind of going like in a curved direction, and if you want to describe this formula, you're going to end up with this. This is not solvable with CSS, obviously. So you can try to approximate it, and you can go and create some sort of, break it down into lines, and each of these lines can be approximated. And you could go this way, but it will not work with calc or CSS, obviously. But this is kind of the idea. So you define the behavior. So you say minimum font size, maximum font size, and then grow in between, interpolate, but meaningfully interpolate. Not like break, but meaningfully, like designer intended it to be, right? Now, we actually, in the beginning, were using this formula that you might have seen before. Where is it? That looks pretty much like this, right? You might have seen this before, right? You have a minimum font size, you have a difference between maximum and minimum font size, then you have 400 VW because you want to tie it in with the viewport width, minus whenever you want the growth to start, and then the difference between the maximum viewport and minimum viewport. I mean, I have resources for this kind of stuff. This has been too difficult. It turned out that we used it in some way, and you can actually make it work and avoid media queries altogether, kind of adjusting the line height just dynamically without you having to do anything. So you define it once in this magical formula, and it kind of works. But it didn't work all the time. Now, you could go ahead and create this kind of layout. Imagine applying this kind of formula, or a formula, to everything. And I'm talking everything. The width, the height, the padding, the margin, everything in the layout defined using a formula. You need to turn it off. No problem. You just set the font size using this calc formula, whatever it is. I know it sounds like magic numbers, but you will actually find your number, the one that works best for you, right? And then if you want to turn it off at some point because you maybe have an advertising unit that's fixed, well, you just set a font size on the container, like on the component in pixels, and everything inside of it is defined using M units, right? And then you end up with this. Everything is fluid because body font size is fluid. And if you're using rem units, then basically everything is growing up and down as you wish, right? But then this fixed thing, this fixed container, the add, remains fixed. Or you could do it the other way around. This is the one we ended up doing in the end. Everything is just as regular, font size 100%. And then you turn on the fluid behavior, but using this formula, somewhere in a container, in a fluid container. And everything inside of that container is defined using M units, right? And you end up with this. So everything is fixed, more or less. Right? But this component in the middle, the bigger font size, it just magically adjusts itself, becoming smaller and larger as it needs. Now, think about applying this kind of concept to everything in the layout. Remember that layout? Every single thing here, including the menu, the border of the menu, the padding of the text in the menu, the size of the SVG icon, the text, the headings, the tags, the underlines, the buttons, the width, the height, the padding, the margin, the everything is literally defined using these kind of formulas. It didn't take a lot of media queries to create this kind of layout. I mean, obviously, you will see a break now coming where we kind of have a major switch, like a major breakpoint, right? Where we have this thing kind of floating to the right, and then the tabs are kind of getting away, right? But now, from now on, whether you have 4,000 pixels width, 7,000 pixels, and so on, it will just keep growing in proportion without us having to do anything. That works. No media queries required at all. And if we look into the code, you'll find a lot of stuff like this. It's kind of a simplified version, so to say, of that formula that I showed. We're just using calc. and obviously VW or VH units. In fact, more often VH than VW, right? And that's pretty much how it works. One other thing that was also interesting, and I think that many of you will have seen it before, is namespacing in CSS. We're using BAM. And I don't know, how many of you are using namespacing? Okay, so it's quite familiar. But one of the cool things is to really make sure that every single component that you have kind of have a proper namespace. For example, O for objects, L for layout stuff, C for models and like specific implementation, specific components, T for theming, and S for scoped content if you have a CMS that needs to kind of inject something inside. Then you also have the different states and utilities, and you can go all the way. But the thing is, it really makes your writing code so much nicer, right? Because you know exactly what you're dealing with. You can just read code and tell exactly what's actually happening without just by looking at the code, right? And one thing that people tend to forget, this is coming from Harry Roberts, by the way, you can also outline some of the things that you have because it's all scoped, right? So you can say, I want to see all components, I want to see all objects, I want to see all utilities in one, right? That's pretty cool. Another thing that we use sometimes is all initial, which kind of helps you stop inheritance. Many of you are familiar with all initial? Some people? Which basically, the problem is if you have a component inside of another component inside of another component, well, you'd want to prevent properties, CSS attributes from leaking down the cascade sometimes. So if you set all initial, it basically just prevents the cascade from happening, right? So it's not going to inherit all the properties of its its ancestors. And it's actually really well supported. Well, who doesn't support it, but we're used to it at this point, right? And you need to provide some fallback, which would be, for this kind of stuff, which would be just nothing. Or something. I'm not sure. I'm just looking at something else. Another thing that's also interesting is if you have something that has to be refactored, you can also add ref class on top of it. That's also nice because you know then what you need to fix. So you can do things like this, like, okay, this has been refactored because we did have to do some refactoring. So, okay, this is refactored. We're good to go. And this is not refactored, so we need to fix this. Right? And one thing that we're playing with right now is responsive suffixes. I don't know if you're using them. Again, just to make the code a bit more legible. Have you tried to do something like this in CSS and HTML? Right? That's actually quite nice because then you know exactly what is actually happening behind the scenes. Right? So, in terms of performance, I have to go, damn it. How much time can you give me?
1 hour.
Okay, so I'll just keep going. But then you will have to drag me if you listen or not. That doesn't matter. One thing that was also nice is the idea of logic fault, which was also coming from Mike Friedman, where he was talking about CSS custom properties. Anybody using CSS custom properties? In production, anybody? Come on. So they're very, very nice. And the reason for it is, and some people will say, why? We don't need them. We don't need CSS variables in browsers. We have our preprocessors. Well, there are many advantages that actually CSS properties have. With CSS custom properties, we now can separate logic from design, effectively separating variable declarations from property declarations. Because logic lives above design then, I like to call this separation logic fold. That's really interesting, and we thought about what does it even mean and how can we apply it. Now, if you think about this CSS custom properties, and I'm sure that some of you might have seen them before, this is what it looks like. You can define a variable, and then you can redefine it using it in the media query or anywhere else. Now, the main difference between this kind of variable and the static variable that you have in your preprocessors is when preprocessors run it, they basically just output static variables. Almost ready. Promise you, maybe. Okay. But then you can redefine it, and once you redefine it, the best part about it is the design and the rendering will be recalculated. So all variable expressions and calc statements that use CSS custom properties will be recalculated when the variable is redefined. Imagine you have a special media query or so, while preprocessor is just static. Well, these variables are dynamic. Unlike preprocessors, they have knowledge of the DOM and can be scoped to DOM elements. So you can do things like this. And the way it works is, again, you define the variable over here, like anywhere. This is why, again, we're talking about the logic fold. And the top, you define kind of the custom common things that you have. And then you can also redefine them using media queries. This is where the logic comes into play. And then you can use it by referring to it using the var here. And if you need to transform it or change it or make it negative, you can do it using calc, right? And there are a couple of things you can do with it. Maybe let me show you just an example. Here, like for theming, it's great as well. This is the formula, by the way, which we're using. And you can have like minimum font size, maximum font size, lower font range, upper font range. Then you just plug it in. And if you need to transform from one unit to another, because all these things on the top, they have no units. It's 15 or 18. You just need to use calc to multiply with one VH or one pixel or one whatever. And then you transform into that unit. Now, a practical example of it was this thing that we're building, where if you have a certain level of membership, then you can see certain things on hover, and then we have different colors, background colors on it. And it's like a perfect case for CSS custom variables. Because you can say, well, I'm going to define these variables, and then depending on the state, I'm just going to redefine them, and you're pretty much done. So here we have the unordered list and LI for members and for supporters and so on. This is the different tiers for membership, right? And then in our CSS, we're defining the variables. And then also if you have like high contrast mode, I can also redefine it, obviously. And then you define the background color for the first one and for the second one and so on and so forth. So this is where the logic lives. And then on the promo box, whatever its parent is, we're just using this background color. And the second parameter kind of gives you the fallback in case it's not defined, right? But obviously, you will have to define some sort of fallback for it as well, which we do here, right? And you can actually plug it in nicely because it basically just plugs it in, injects it, more or less. And then you have it's done. It's just, that's it, right? I mean, you can pull something similar with preprocessors as well, but this is just so much nicer with custom variables. By the way, how would you do this effect, visual effect? GIF? No. 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 This is actually really easy to do once you kind of put your head for 5 minutes in it. You just use a background image. It's a linear gradient. You do set the background size at 200%. The first 100% is gray, so this is why it's grayed out. And the second 50% is like this transparent color, whichever is coming from the theme at the top, right? And then on hover, the only thing you change is background position minus 100, and opacity is changing from 0 to 1. That's it. That's not difficult at all. And CSS variables are really well supported, by the way. And this is accept you-know-who. But again, at this point, we are used to it. Now, I can keep going, and I will, unless, no. But I'm finishing. I do, I promise. Right. There are many things we learned, and actually I'm going to write an article. Again, I will make the slides available anyway. But there is one thing that I want to take away from this. I spent too much time on the first half, I'm sorry. One thing is really, really important. It doesn't matter what you do. It will never be the way you want it to be. I learned it the hard way. And so this has been the journey of my life for the last 1.5 years. So I hope you will appreciate it. Can we turn on the music, please? And that's the last one. It's 1 minute. That's just sad. But I've got cats, so that's okay. Cats everywhere. Thank you. And now.
Thank you so much, Vitaly.
Thank you.